Sway, 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 sway. Encouragement. Good for you.
Greetings and welcome to Drumbeat, the rhythm of African American history and culture in South Carolina. I'm Bhakti Larry Hough, and I'm here with you every other Sunday at 5 p.m. discussing African American history and culture with various guests. The show is presented by the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission and sponsored and produced by the Wigoja Foundation. Since 1979, the nation has been celebrating Black Music Month. In 2009, President Barack Obama signed a proclamation and renamed the month African American Music Appreciation Month. So today on Drumbeat, we celebrate the vast contributions of African American composers and musicians and singers and songwriters whose work has had a major impact on this society and on pretty much all of the music that is produced in this society. So my first guest today is George Donnie Brown. He is the youngest member of the Sensational Brown Brothers, a gospel music group that hails from the Effingham community of Florence. They have been singing together for 61 years. Wow. The group originally consisted of 9 biological brothers, the Brown Brothers. 4 of them have passed away in recent years. So, they have been recognized at the South Carolina State House recently, and they are featured in an exhibit at the National Museum of African American Music in Nashville, Tennessee. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to Drumbeat, George Donnie Brown. And hello, George Donnie Brown. Welcome to Drumbeat.
Man, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure just to see you, man, and we really are so excited about having this interview with you. The Brown Brothers, I'm speaking for all of them. They're out and about today, and God has been good, as He has always been. And I see He's kept you and He's kept us, so we're grateful.
Absolutely. Well, it's an honor to be talking with you as well. And yes, indeed, God has kept us and taken good care of us. And so we're indeed blessed. And you guys have definitely been blessed. 61 years?
61 years. I don't look much older than 15, I don't think. Been here a while.
Yeah, I mean, and you're the youngest of the group.
I'm the youngest of the 9 brothers.
Mm-hmm.
If I be blessed, I'll be 73 in a few months.
All right. Very good. So you being the youngest, I mean, were you with the group when it started out?
Yes. Actually, we started singing before the group was formed. Mm-hmm. We sung with another group, some of us, and over the years we all started together, went together. Mm-hmm. It started with 9 blood brothers born by one man and one woman.
Wow.
Yes,
that's amazing.
And God has really kept us in His care, mm-hmm. and allowed us to travel all over the country, mm-hmm. Spreading the gospel.
Well, what do you credit with such longevity? How have you been able to keep it all together for so long?
I would say faith and trusting God, and we never ever look at it as being coming to where we are at today. Actually, we never thought about the fame part of it. We were just doing it because mother and father taught us the way, and that God had control of all our lives, and that's all we was concentrating on over the years. And we really have been blessed and got to meet some very, very fabulous people over the years. Like- and it's give us a pleasure just to be able to talk with you today.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, thank you so much. Well, tell me, were your parents musically inclined? I mean, did they have musical gifts?
Yes, our parents were very good uh, vocalists, and our sisters are too. We have four sisters, and
Mm-hmm.
they were blessed with some voices too. And
Mm-hmm.
they never ever traveled with the brothers, but our mother and father used to get on the bus and ride with us.
Mm-hmm.
So we came from a long line of singing, gospel singing people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, when did you release your first album?
Our first album was released in 1980.
No. Okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So y'all did a lot of singing and traveling before you started recording then.
Yes, we did.
Mm-hmm.
Over the
Okay.
years, and then we boosted up to over 100 songs over the years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Uh, uh, original music? How much of it
Some
was original?
original, some original and revision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So what was your role in the group? I mean, were you a lead singer or guitarist or what was your role?
I'm the original lead guitar player for the Sensational Brown Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, over the years since we lost a few, uh, I end up doing more vocal and leading.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, who are some of the other folks that you've shared the stage with throughout your journey?
Oh, we shared the stage with Minister Shirley Caesar, James Cleveland, the Swanee Quintet, Jackson Southerners. Originally, the Jackson Southerners was the one that actually took us into the studio, and we got our first album made that really did good for the Brown Brothers.
No.
And
Okay.
we also worked with the William Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't quite a few back in the early part of our journey. There wasn't very many that we didn't work with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We did good.
Right. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, um, what have been some of the challenges that you faced? I mean, I know that, I mean, you've had a really good long run career, but I know it couldn't have been easy all the time. So I'm just wondering what might have been some of the challenges you faced and how did you meet them and deal with them?
Well, there were like you said, there were many challenges that tried to deter us and make us give up. But we kept on going. Early part where we had to travel. and had to hunt places to stay overnight. There were some challenges, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The younger groups probably would never realize what we all been through back in the day, moving from place.
Mm-hmm.
The promoters, and there was some disappointments and all, but we were determined to keep doing it. And it basically just our faith in Christ
Right.
and our upbringing that kept us doing what we do 61 years. I'm gonna just give it all credit to him, because there was none of the challenges that we were faced with was too much for him to handle.
That's
God.
right. That's right.
That's what made us stayed in there as long as we have.
Okay.
We spoke about retiring, but we got a younger group that's coming in now, and they are going to keep the Brown Brothers going, even after we decide to back up.
Okay.
It's been down for about a year and a half, and we are doing some booking, and we getting ready to start moving out again. You know, COVID kind of locked a little bit.
Okay. Well, that's good. Good. Yeah. Well, I know that this pandemic has really hit performing artists really, really hard, and it's good to know that you and others are starting to book again and travel again and get out there and do some things. So, how would you describe the music of the Sensational Brown Brothers?
The Brown Brothers music, we stayed traditional. We kind of revived a few songs, but we sung Flatfoot, and even before we had the instruments, we sung by just patting our feet and clapping our hands. So the music now is an accomplishment to us, but we have to have it to sing.
Okay. All right. So does that mean then that maybe some of your songs and some of your shows that you did sing a cappella without musical accompaniment?
Yes, we did. We did many of them.
Well, that's great, and I want to congratulate you on being having a display at the National African American Music Museum in Nashville. I was there a couple of weeks ago, and I had heard, that you were featured in the museum, and I looked for the display but could not find it. I guess maybe I was in the wrong part of the building or there at the wrong time or something.
Right.
But anyway, it's good to know that you're being recognized on the national scale in that way. How does that feel?
It really kind of took us in surprise, because there was a lady named Miss Porter from Indiana that came through and had spoke with us earlier a couple of years ago about some material, and was interested in Brown Brothers, and that's how it transpired, and we thought it was some of the other hosts that had been coming our way through the years, and lo and behold, we was notified that we had been inducted into the museum in Nashville. Nashville is actually our first national recording artist. Recording was recorded at HSC in Nashville.
Ah, okay.
And and it all went back to the same place. So we really were surprised to know that. But we want to give our credit again to Christ, to all the disc jockeys and all the radio people, angels for looking out for the Brown Brothers over the years. We were the HSE radio back where you had to listen at, put your ear real close to the radio here back in the day, and they used to be playing the Brown Brothers, and we were really excited. But it's all worked out good for and we are very happy and pleased that we had the support to make this happen.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, that's fantastic. And you've also been honored at the South Carolina State House, and Representative Terry Alexander of Florence presented you guys with a resolution, and here you are at State House with Representative Alexander and some other people.
Yes, that's the Brown Brothers, the band. We have the whole organization over there at the State House. We was invited over there, and we was presented with a resolution that the governor, McMaster, we and the lieutenant governor, we really was ecstatic with all the things that happened that day.
Wonderful. Yeah, I see you there with the governor and your sister and brother-in-law, who I know very well.
Yes.
Doris and Nate Lockhart.
Yes.
Okay. And where was this picture taken right here?
This picture was taken at my niece's residence, where we are right now. I mean, her mom's house now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Now these are a couple of album covers. If I can help somebody, when was this album released?
Oh, wow, that was in probably 85.
Okay. All right. And here's another one.
That was probably the same year.
Okay. Well, y'all were putting out more than one album a year?
Yeah, back when we was signed with HC, we was required to do 3 albums a year.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing. There's some snazzy suits y'all wearing there, man.
Yeah, man. I wish I had some of those to wear now.
I hear you. All right. Okay. All righty. Well, after 61 years, I know there have been some changes. So how has the group changed over the years?
Well, I guess we changed the format a bit because of the newer musicians, and we get a little different beat to the music. But we try to hold to our platform, even though the music is a little spicy.
Right. I hear you. And I know you started out with 9 brothers, and I think you've lost 4 along the way.
Right.
Okay.
And there's 5 of us left, and we still do what we do.
Right. Okay. And so you've added some other members?
We have 2 nephews, some other members that the band itself is all other people.
Okay.
But nephews, they sing vocal.
So congratulations. Are you looking to release any new music anytime soon?
Yes, we are presently working on a couple of new releases. Okay. We hope it'll be out by the end of the year.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay. And the brothers that are remaining, give me their names.
We have Henry, Sam, Billy, Norris, and myself, Donnie.
Well, Donnie, any closing thoughts you want to share?
Yes, Yeah, before I forget, I really, on behalf of the Sensational Brown Brothers, we really want to take our hats off to you and Drumbeat for this opportunity to speak to the people and let them know that we are still singing God praise, and you can get in touch with us through all the media areas, and we'll be more than happy to come in and sing a song for you. And we want to thank you and your organization.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome, and thank you. It's been quite, an honor, to speak with you during Black Music Month when we are,
Yes.
paying tribute to the great accomplishments of African American artists everywhere, and especially to local artists like you, guys who have been based locally but have traveled the nation, uh, spreading the gospel. So thank you so very much for all that you guys have done and
And
will
thank you.
continue to
And
do.
thank you again.
All right. George Donnie Brown, the youngest member of the Sensational Brown Brothers of Florence. Thank you so very much for being with us on Drumbeat today. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back with a conversation with ethnomusicologist Dr. Birgitta J. Johnson. But first, let's listen to the Brown Brothers perform their signature song, Kneel at the Cross. Welcome back to Drumbeat. I'm Bhakti Larry Hough. For this portion of the program, we're going to speak with Dr. Birgitta J. Johnson, who teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in world music, African American music, African music, and ethnomusicology. She received her Bachelor of Arts degree from Agnes Scott College, where she played piano, violin, Ghanaian drums, and sang in Joyful Noise, the gospel choir. Dr. Johnson received her master's and doctorate degrees in ethnomusicology from the University of California at Los Angeles, or UCLA. She's a multi-instrumentalist and singer. She has performed professionally and are recorded with artists and ensembles from a variety of genres, including the African American Philharmonic of Atlanta, the Southeast Symphony Orchestra of Metropolitan Los Angeles, and the Gospel Music Workshop of America. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to Drumbeat, Dr. Birgitta J. Johnson. And hello, Dr. Birgitta Johnson, and welcome to Drumbeat.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today as we celebrate Black Music Month. But first, tell us a little bit about your musical journey. You're a performer, teacher, ethnomusicologist. So, what is black music to you? And what brought you to the place that you occupy in the realm of music?
All right, I'm gonna tackle all of those. Try to be as brief as I can. I'm an ethnomusicologist. I've always loved music growing up. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, and so I started playing music early. I was, you know, started playing violin in the second grade. I was in Atlanta public school systems, and my violin teacher was an African American female, Audrey Reese, and that's how I got introduced to formal, taking um, ensemble lessons. And it was great because I came up in the 80s, and at that time in my orchestra as well as others around the city, we were not only playing classical music, we were also playing African American music. And so the things that I grew up listening to at home, popular music, R&B, soul, spirituals, gospel music, my orchestra teacher also brought those types of pieces into our orchestral room, and a lot of them were being arranged by another local music teacher, David Robertson III, over in the DeKalb County system. And so we had a unique experience as young Black orchestra players. My school was predominantly Black. We could play the music that came from our communities as well as came from the European traditions. So that was kind of my introduction to diversity in music, and also coming from a kind of Black-centric place where it was all together at one time. And so eventually started taking piano lessons in middle school, and that was kind of my private lesson situation, and went on to major in music in college. In undergrad, I went to Agnes Scott College, and I was a piano major, but I also continued playing violin. So I played orchestral music, piano music, and I was always interested in all kinds of music. I still go back to, I'm old enough to remember vinyl records. And so after school, we were the latchkey kids. So, after school playing my parents' records, and that included Stevie Wonder, but I also got into things like jazz because we had in Atlanta WCLK. And so I started getting introduced to people like Ella Fitzgerald. And so my musical taste was always very diverse, and I was always interested in also hearing the background of what was going on in the music that was the older music, as well as what was happening in our, young people in the 80s coming up with the beginning of hip hop, as well as all the great R&B that was happening, and just really into that. And even, coming up in Atlanta, being exposed to Caribbean music through CLK and other local radio stations. So I'm a child of Black radio as well as, Black music education. So in my senior year in undergrad, I got introduced to this field called ethnomusicology, which is the study of music and culture. And so the ethno part of that is, the study of man, and also ethnographic study, as in not only studying music and learning how to play it, but also the background and the history and the cultural, underpinnings of music in society. And so I was like, I've always been doing that. I've just, it was kind of natural to me. That was kind of what my life was with music. And so I decided to go to graduate school for it. Initially, I had kind of graduated from undergrad and was just working a regular bank job, and not really doing anything besides just gigging. And so I was like, if you're going to go back to school, go back for what you want.
Well, what are some of those enduring aspects of Black music that define it as Black music as such?
It's amazing that a lot of things that what defines Black music, essentially as Black music, is also what makes it so popular to everyone else. And so one of the big things that people normally don't go to first is how close that music is a part of every aspect of life. So when we think about the African traditions and music in African context, there is music for everything. There's music for births, marriages, deaths, different age groups, different ethnic groups, different vocations, different parts of life. There's for times of year. And so there's this rich cultural heritage of music being connected to every aspect of life cycles. And we kind of bought that consciousness, the everyday has music for it. The ancestors have music. And so there's music for everything, and we produce music for all those aspects of life. And so when it comes down to on this side of the waters, and we see how the blues could give you exactly what was going on in people's lives, even if they couldn't speak out against the racism of the day. The blues always captured what Black people were going through or feeling, even if they couldn't say it out loud in regular society. You see the spiritual speaking about how people thought spiritually about what they were going through in the slave period, even though they couldn't directly protest it. So their music was always reflecting where they were, how they were, what they were feeling, whether it be, negative things or bad things, but also great things, celebratory things, how Black music affirms itself, affirms people in it, regardless of what's going on around it. So you think about a group of people fighting for their humanity at every turn, but their music is proving their humanity as they're going through this. And so that kind of touching every aspect of life is what we see, and people being able to make music out of anything, either materially with actual instruments or just skill level, being able to orally pass down traditions, not necessarily having to go to have lessons or have someone tell you this is how this beat goes. And things like embodied rhythms and the connection between rhythm and dance and movement and singing and storytelling, all those kind of things that we brought from Africa and kept with us. Other things like music being used for communication. We talk about coded messages. We talk about songs that kind of tell people, like we talk about the spirituals, with helping people to escape to freedom oftentimes, as well as people just sending out warnings, singing certain songs to let people know this is a time to, watch out for what's going on, or in some cases, or encouragement. You think about the civil rights movement. People weren't in the back of those paddy wagons singing just because they like singing. They were encouraging themselves, and they also were letting people know around them to be encouraged. And so people didn't know what to do with that. You got police officers throwing school children in the back of police wagons, and they're singing. And so they don't really know what's going on. They just like, well, wait a minute, we're about to take them to a bad place, and they're over here singing, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. And so that's one thing. But then when you see that on television in the 60s and see that, even though people are being beat and they're still singing, they're in jail and they're singing. And then you also look at how when history books kept leaving us out, our songs told us who we were. You had songs like John Henry and others that were really telling people about what the Black experience was about when we were being left out of the history books. And so those are a few things. Improvisation, of course, when we think about musicologically speaking, things like improvisation is key to a lot of Black music. Call and response, where it's very much an idea about communalness of singing, people singing together. I say something, you respond back to me. So when we say call and response in church, we know that means a lead singer is singing and you got the choir backing them up. But you also have in R&B and all your, Motown groups, anytime someone says something, somebody says it right back. You think about Aretha Franklin, and she says, respect, and her background singer says just a little bit. So that constant back and forth of call and response, and people love those kind of aspects of groove where all this is kind of rhythmics being piled on each other. So there's a lot of rhythm and a lot of, percussion and drumming. And like you said, polyrhythms, those things are preferred as opposed to other cultures that might say, well, that's too much noise, or it's too dense, or it's too much going on at one time. And we were like, we love it. Give us some more background vocals. And so we see that throughout, regardless of the genres that we touch. There's certain musical characteristics and ways of thinking about music. You think about even the timbre, how we oftentimes are, as singers, you want to bring a forth of emotion. So it's not always about having a sweet, pretty, cute sound. If you're singing the blues, you're singing about hard times, you might have a raspy voice. If you're singing about gospel, you calling out to God, it's not always going to be a cute voice. You might have a nice growl and a rasp in your voice. You might have a nice gospel squall, and then everybody passes out because they know exactly what kind of emotion that you're tapping into. So how we think about sound and imitating sounds in nature, and then vice versa. You see our instrumentalists imitating the human voice. And so when you hear a guitar player, he sounds like he's moaning on that guitar. That's an African aesthetic, to make the instrument sound like the human voice. And so this very layered way of thinking about music making is what we brought with us from Africa. And of course, it got spread all across the diaspora in North America, the Caribbean, and South America. But definitely you see it in variations, and these same characteristics keep coming up over and over again.
Okay. Well, even in the context of that consistency, what makes for the various genres that Black music is expressed in? I mean, you've got gospel, jazz, blues, R&B, soul, hip hop, rap, and if you consider the diaspora, reggae and calypso and all this.
Hmm.
So, what has allowed for such wide diversity within that Black or African soul expression?
Well, when you start with diversity, you always end up with diversity because that's one thing that a lot of people are finally learning now, that it wasn't one African peoples taken into slavery or taken into enslavement for the transatlantic slave trade. It was hundreds, thousands of languages, hundreds of types of people in groups, and all up and down the west and central coast of Africa, going all the way into the interior. And so when we have so many different traditions in the mix, you're going to have that diversity. They're not going to sound the same. They're going to be variations on certain themes and also some very unique and distinct types of cultures and traditions. When you start thinking about what happened to us when we got here in those first 2 centuries, some people were in places where they was free to express African traditions and keep them things alive. And so when you go down to Brazil and hear candomblé and they're singing in another version of Yoruba, or you go down to Cuba and look at Santeria and they're singing in ancient, Yoruba languages. Same thing with Haiti with voodoo, and they're singing in those kind of Congolese languages. You can still hear it. It's because they were in a enslavement context where that was still allowed. It wasn't banned. And then you go into the North American context where a lot of that was banned. A lot of groups of people were mixed together on purpose because they
Hmm.
wanted to keep down slave rebellion. So they wanted to make sure you weren't from the same parts in the same country. If you look like you're from the same African tribe, they wanted to make sure you were mixed up. And so the transmission of a lot of traditions changed based on where you were, when you were in the diaspora, and also just the other piece is the creativity of Africans in these new contexts. And so you are now developing music trying to remember an African past, but in this new American context. And so you might get, in the case of, you think about, some of our Latin American cousins, they might have things where they mix African music with Spanish styles and come up with these kind
Hmm.
of Afro fusions. You look at what happens in New Orleans, where you have this kind of Creolized style, where there's more a little bit of a French and Spanish tinge to what they are doing. You think about our Gullah communities that were, for the most part, left alone for a long time, so they got to preserve a lot of Africanness in their language and their foodways and some of their music making practices, right? And so that diversity comes from a diverse people as well as these diverse experiences. And then it's just the genius of Black music to be creative. We think about, African Americans in different communities, they have different traditions. We have, we just passed the national observance of Juneteenth, and people who grow up in Texas have been celebrating Juneteenth for generations. And so what they do for Juneteenth is distinctive to that experience coming up in Texas and their traditions and what they've been doing for Juneteenth versus what everybody else is now learning about Juneteenth. And so,
Hmm.
regional styles matter. If you're in a Southern experience where you have access to, for example, trees, you can probably make drums. But if you are someone who is taken to the New England area, you don't have as many Black people around you. And so what you preserve is going to be a little bit different. And so as we see going towards the 20th century and African Americans moving around and migrating to different urban centers and city centers, they're taking their traditions, they're mixing with other people, and then they're having regional styles and things that are very popular. So when you think about, for example, people would talk about, Motown versus Stax. Stax is this Southern label being very much focused on dance music and bass and very blues based music. And in Detroit, a very much urbanized type record company thinking about a broader sound. It's Black music,
Hmm.
but it's Black music for a broader community. Then you go right over to Chicago, and they're basically, the northern exports of Mississippi. They're going to definitely be in some blues based, but they're another urban kind of sound. So they're electrified blues versus your Delta sound and your more folky sound in Mississippi. So everywhere African Americans are going, they're doing and creating different styles of music, but they're also going back to that number one thing I said. They're reflecting what was going on in their everyday lives. And so their music is
Hmm.
sounding like who they are. It's sounding like where they are. So when you go into post-World War II, for example, on the West Coast, you have that West Coast rhythm and blues style. It's going to have a little bit more jazz to it, a little bit more laid back. It's going to be, tempered by the fact that African Americans got a little bit more freedom than they are in other parts of the country, where they have their clubs and nightclubs and dance clubs, but they're not big ballrooms. They're small clubs. So what they're performing, like Charles Brown, you know, um, doing his late night type club songs, very much romantic rhythm and blues combo ballads that remind you of Nat King Cole, versus when you go to, your Midwesterns with your Count Basie influenced dance styles, and everyone's jumping around and having a good time, and rhythm and blues is a lot faster and danceable. So African Americans are basically, making music that fits where they are, who they are, their regional styles. We see that today in the different regional styles of hip hop. And that's literally why you get that diversity, and people like it. They like it and they propel it, they support it, and then you keep that diversity going.
Okay. All right. Well, what explains, if you could go a little further with why it has had black music has had such a major influence on music produced by Europeans, specifically. Why has it had such a major influence? Because you can talk to many rock musicians, or rock and roll musicians, especially those that were involved in the British invasion from England, the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. And when asked, the first thing they will say is that they were influenced by African American music, primarily the blues. They'll cite people like Robert Johnson and Muddy Waters and folk like that. So what is it about the music that has had that impact on others?
Yeah, the blue, and that you hit on the head, the blues in particular. When you think about coming into the 20th century, those kind of major African American genres that coalesce into larger forms like the blues, and then eventually your spirituals and hymns evolve into gospel music. The reason why they can say that is because, one, they felt something. And so when you think about a white British teen saying, I love Robert Johnson, I love, Muddy Waters. And then you listen to Robert Johnson and Muddy Waters, and what are they singing about? They're singing about everyday life. They're singing about heartbreak, but they're doing it in a particular way that everyone can relate to. They're singing about the rawness of life. They're singing about romance. A lot of the popular music in the late 19th century and 20th century was very esoteric and very romantic and very clean and pristine and kind of Victorian era. Black music was real. It was on the ground. It was telling you about what was going on Friday night and Sunday morning, and what might happen on Saturday night before Sunday morning. And so it was a heavy story-based telling lyrical content, one, and then the sounds made you feel it. So when we talk about things like blue notes and bending notes and people having those kind of sounds that make you believe what they're singing, that's what they're being attracted to. And that's kind of how it's always been. So you have this idea of, even before our British invasions, you have jazz becoming a global sound in the 1910s and 1920s. And so we call the 1920s the jazz age. They're talking about that genre. So even though black people are still going into the beginnings of Jim Crow life, segregation is kicking up, racial terror is becoming an all-time high, because that's the same decade as the birth of a nation. But this sound called jazz has now become so-called the sound of freedom. In the case of the military, it's become the so-called the sound of democracy. So now you have jazz musicians being sent across the world to kind of be ambassadors for American culture. Even though we're in the midst of a separated society, that music makes people want to live, have a good time. They makes them want to dance, have a good time, get together, be together, even though racially they're not together. So you're thinking about black music and how it attracts people to it. And then they are influenced by it because they grew up listening to it. So when you think about your Rolling Stones saying, I heard this on the radio, and even go down to the 80s when Annie Lennox said, I used to listen to Aretha Franklin on radio, and she's once again, she's not from America. And so they're listening to radio and listening to these sounds and hearing these stories about life and liking that more than what they have going on their regular stations or whatever. And that's who they want to become, or that's who they want to emulate. We remember, I think, the Rolling Stones touring with, Little Richard, and seeing the liveness of the performance. Because that was the other aspect of it. You hear it, and then a lot of the guys who was coming from the British invasion, they had seen American blues artists because the blues revival happened. And those blues artists that people they want to hear from in America had already been touring Europe in the 50s and early 60s. And so they were like, these are our heroes, our blues heroes. We can see them. And now they get to see what it looks like in a live context beyond the radio. It took it to another level. And so you had that, you had that tradition of artists, looking at and sometimes not even realizing that these core aesthetics that I just named sound or what's attracting them to it. And of course, you start having record companies understand very, very quickly that blues music is very popular because of the lyrical content, because of the danceability to it. It's almost taboo because they do identify it as black music, even though they may not say it. It's kind of something that makes money quickly, and it starts to outpace things like Tin Pan Alley in the early parts of the 20th century. And then you start seeing the race music industry really take off, where you have people who they never thought they were going to record making million-seller records, like Bessie Smith's music and Mamie Smith's music taking off. And it's like, one black woman singing, who would want to hear her sing? And then, Crazy Blues took off, and they was like, oh my gosh, people like this. And it's not just black people, white people like this music. And so the record industry picked up really quickly, even before recorded sound, sheet music of, ragtime. They figured out it was something about black music that other people like. You don't have to be black to like black music. And they were probably among the first to start saying, well, we can get into this business. We may not want to deal with these people, but we can make money off the sound. And so you start having that. And of course, as people are exposed to these sounds and they're raised with these sounds, they want to either emulate them or they're influenced by them.
Speak about race in music, the cultural appropriation.
Yeah, and this it's always great to contextualize it, because at this point, segregation is the law of the land. And so, and like, even when we talk about the Cotton Club wasn't segregated. It was a white club that had black workers. And so black people didn't go to it. They worked there. They didn't go to it. Segregated clubs mean you can go on one day, or you might go on one part of the week, or you might go at the nighttime, or they might put you on a particular show. They could even go there. But the Cotton Club was also broadcast on the radio. And so you get to hear it in the Northeast. You could hear Duke Ellington, you get to hear the big band jazz. And so when we get into that, as well as cultural appropriation, it's a more contemporary term. It's a lot of things and a lot of moving parts. And so when you think about an artist, for example, we talk about the cover versions that are popular, but we don't talk about the cover versions that are not popular. The 1950s and 60s, when the industry had this idea of let's cover the black people's music and make money off of it, that worked for a little bit until the black music won. It was on radio anyway. So when young white teenagers started to hear the originals, they didn't want the copies anymore. And so when Alan Freed comes along and labels rhythm and blues rock and roll, it was literally with that in mind. He was like, I'm going to label it rock and roll because I know they identify rhythm and blues as a black music and a black genre, but I also think the black artists need to have their credit. So I'm going to call it rock and roll. And so when you look at his rock and roll tours and rock and roll radio shows, where he would get a whole bunch of artists on one bill, like 15 to 20 artists, they would go on tour. Most of them were actually black artists. And so he's already pushing against what the segregation rules were around the country, because people were like, I want to hear this new thing called rock and roll, even though we all know black people knew it was rhythm and blues, but it's giving these spaces. So now they're playing these segregated halls, where they either have a rope down the middle or balcony seating to separate people. But the young people, the young whites in particular, who are coming up and saying, I love this music. These people make this music. I hear it on the radio. I have a good time. There's nothing wrong with this music because when I've been to this party, nothing happened. Why am I separate from these people? So you can't divorce the fact that people were going into segregated spaces, listening to this music, realizing that I don't want the cover watered down version. I want the real version of it. They're starting to go into the record company and say, I want the real version, or they're ordering it on the phone, getting it mailed ordered, or they're going to the concerts or sneaking off. You have so many white baby boomers saying, I snuck off and went to go see XYZ black artists, right? Because of segregation. Eventually, when the 60s come, those same teenagers are going to be your hippies saying, something's wrong with America, because we keep claiming we're democratic. We keep claiming it's a free country, but I can't go party with them. I can't hang out with them. So that upheaval of the 60s is directly related to what's happening in post-World War II America, when they're looking at one thing and living another thing. They're starting to say something's not right. It's they talk about this kind of generational rift is happening. It's because they're literally saying, wait, I like Ray Charles. Why can't I hang out with people who look like Ray Charles? Why can't I go to school with someone who looks like Ruth Brown? What is the problem? They make good music. They seem like nice people. They work hard, and so the young people are going to be the ones starting to push back, to the point where you had people who own soda shops and, little diners. They actually had signs. If you don't want Negro people in your businesses, don't play Negro music. So they knew exactly what the music was doing. We still have those signs. They were literally saying, if you don't want these people in your establishment, don't put their music in the jukebox. They knew eventually not only would Black people come to those businesses, white kids would start to play that music more than they would play other music. And so even the rise of the industry trying to push other genres over Black music, you saw that happening a little bit, but the music made a way where a lot of times Black people could not go in those spaces, but the music got there before they did. And so when you start seeing people protest against segregation, it's oftentimes because their favorite artist, Sammy Davis Jr., said, well, I won't play a club if it's segregated. And they say, well, why? Well, wait a minute. I want to see Sammy. Why are we having segregation? Just, and so the fandoms start to push back because they couldn't care less about money. Jim Crow, they would lose money just to maintain itself. But the young people start to kind of ask questions, and they start to lose money when young people say, well, hey, I will go and sneak into a Black club and listen to my favorite Black artist if my Black artist is not going to play in that white club or that segregated venue, right? And so that is the kind of beginning of that destabilization of it. And then, of course, record companies saying, we can't leave this money on the table. We need to start signing some Black artists on our rosters because these copies that we're making are not working out. Now, of course, you have, covers happening. Black artists covered white artists. If you look at Motown, some of their biggest hits were actually original songs by white artists. And so covering is a thing. The cultural appropriation happens, especially when we start thinking about today, is when you are taking someone else's, culture or cultural production or their sound or the whatever expression, and you're taking that and taking up space. And so whereas if I have, for example, a wonderful soul singer, and she, by all accounts, should be a platinum selling artist, but she can't get on anything outside of urban radio. You won't put her on the big pop stations because you don't think she's going to be big enough. But then I get a white artist that sounds just like her, and I'm going to not only put her on the urban station and all the Black stations, I'm going to also put her on the pop stations. I'm going to give her a commercial. I'm going to make sure she plays at the Super Bowl. That's appropriation, but that person's now not only taking someone's culture, may or may not be giving credit for it, and taking up space in the marketplace from someone who originated that culture. And so that's when we have this kind of conversation around what is cultural appropriation and what is not cultural appropriation. We even saw that with our friend Justin Bieber, who got upset because his Grammy nominations were not in rhythm and blues; they weren't in R&B. And he's like, "I made an R&B record," and people were like, "No, you didn't," because everybody in that category, besides being Black, were actually making contemporary R&B, where he was making something that sounded more like a kind of pop, hip hop influence thing. And so he totally didn't. He was like dumbfounded. He's like, "I can't believe the Grammys won't put me in the R&B." Now, mind you, he got nominations, but he wanted them in the rhythm and blues category. And then if you look at that rhythm and blues category, I'm like, Ledisi, are you trying to tell me you are more R&B than Ledisi? Really, Justin Bieber? And so it's just that audacity of an appropriator saying, I am doing R&B, and it's like, no, you're not. You are doing pop music, because so much of Black music has influenced pop music. But if you look at actual rhythm and blues, R&B, soul singers, they are doing something distinctive, and that's who got those so-called nominations in that category. So,
okay, well, we only have a couple of minutes left, and so in that time, if you can just sum up how Black music has influenced American society, and how has American society influenced Black music, and just how would you describe the state of Black music today?
I think the state of Black music is great when you look at the whole picture. I know the state of Black music in the business is I could say sometimes shaky or concerning, because the industry is now a global industry. Now it's a corporate thing. It's not a music thing. It's an entertainment industry. It has so many other ancillary parts running through it. And it's very difficult for artists who just want to do music to just do music, because you have to do so many other things with marketing and social media. And the idea that I just want to focus on my craft is very difficult just to have that. It's very few people who can just sit back and do that, because you're required to do so much. And it's also figuring out how to get to those channels and views and places to be seen. You have wonderful, great artists, but oftentimes hard to see them because there are so many avenues. We got hundreds of channels on television, social media platforms all over the place. So how does an artist build a following and get seen? Those are things that people are working on and working towards. But I think the state of Black music in general is really great because it's doing what it's always done. I like to use like three areas. You think about resistance, protest, and affirmation. And as long as Black music is allowed and can keep doing that, it's going to be great. You think about how Black music, even in the era of Black Lives Matter and the racial injustice, as well as the COVID era, has risen to the occasion, as well as it's encouraging us to go on. It's affirming who we are as great people. So where there might be a society saying that you don't matter or your life doesn't matter. I mean, we're recording today when the verdict is coming out for the murder of George Floyd and how much time he's getting, and people is kind of still, can't believe the man got convicted. Still, he should probably get more time or whatever, and having those kind of conversations. But the fact that we all saw that man murdered, where the music is there to kind of speak to that. We saw in Verses with Timberland and Swiss Beats bring that together, and having legends of Black music play music live for free and having almost 1 million people show up on various platforms. I remember when the George Floyd happened and you had Kirk Franklin and Fred Hammond saying, "I know people are angry, we need to get online," and they did a whole gospel thing. Now, this is when the Instagram decided to change the rules and say you can only play 30 seconds, but that's all Black music needed, because after they played 30 seconds, because those two guys are musicians, they got on the keyboards and played all they wanted, because one, they own their music because they wrote it, and two, they're musicians that can play it. And so Black music was able to even jump over a digital divide and hurdle to serve the people. And so you have those things. I remember, Beyonce put out Black is King in September of 2020, and that's an African-centered, production. Disney's doing it, but it's African artists from all over the continent who are superstars in their own right, and Beyonce bring us an African story and African beauty, and it's not watered down. You have people singing in their own different African languages. You have all these popular styles from different generational African artists, and the world has to sit up and look at it and be affirmed by it and be remembered, as they say in the Lion King. Remember who you are. Remember where you come from. And so Black music reminding people that there is a legacy, even in the midst of all of this upturn and turmoil. That's what it's always done. When they were singing in the bottom of the slave ships, it wasn't because they just wanted to sing. They were reminding themselves of who they were, even if they didn't know where they were going next. And it consistently has done that. And so when you think about, these types of things, if Black music is doing that, Black music is going to be fine. Even in the midst of the oppression or the challenges, Black music finding a way to still speak to the people and, speak for the people, and regardless of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Wonderful. And the perfect note on which to close, even though this conversation could go on for another hour or two and we still wouldn't exhaust the topic.
But it's a great
Dr.
topic.
Birgitta, pardon me?
It's a great topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And one that should be discussed beyond June. And
Definitely.
That's why I'm so grateful that you do the work that you do. And thank you for that. All right. Well, Dr. Birgitta Johnson, Associate Professor of Ethnomusicology at the University of South Carolina, thank you so much for being with us on Drumbeat today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right. And folks, thank you for tuning in today. And we hope that going forward, you will enjoy some music, some Black music in particular. And I would suggest you try a genre that you might not listen to often. If you're a gospel fan, give some jazz a try. If you're a jazz head, give some reggae, a try, or some ska, or some soca, and I think you will find your horizons expanded. So until next time, I'm Bhakti Larry Hough. Thank you for tuning in. I love you. May God richly bless you. And I wish you peace.
That's right.